Well, the first thing I wanted to say this morning is I just wanted to thank the Lord for life. He wants a relationship with us. He's given us life. And he's given each of us a story, a testimony. We all have one. It's very important. And for those of you who know me well, everything with me is a story. You can't ask me something without a story coming out of my mouth. But my testimony did not begin when I was born. And some of you might say, well, no, it began when you were in your mother's womb. No. Nope. Yeshua has made it perfectly clear through many confirmations that his story, my testimony began in 1938. Yes, I said 1938, in the midst of a violent storm, what we now call a hurricane. There was no Doppler radar then. There were no warnings. There were no preparations. Nothing. Now let me backtrack a little. My father came to this country from Italy, speaking very little English, little education. He was bullied, and yet he began a business that is still now over 100 years old and thriving. He had 3 children. 2 were in school in the city back in October of 1938. And his wife, an 18-month-old child, were at their summer home closing down for the winter. A neighbor came over for tea to help her. Soon the Atlantic Ocean began to roll in a storm like they had never seen, and it crashed over the seawall of this massive oceanfront home. They tried to caulk the windows, but soon they realized that was not going to work. So they decided to climb to the attic for safety. She hands the neighbor the 18-month-old and says, "Hang on to her. The Lord will watch over her and save her." The roof then blew off, and she was hurled into the ocean, to be found days later, deceased. The neighbors spent over 4 hours battling the storm. May I repeat, 4 hours battling a storm. He was kicking refrigerators, ovens, and whatever you might consider the things of life that we put importance in. He was kicking them, and after 5 hours, he looked down and realized that the 18-month-old that he had been holding had slipped away and ended up as her mother had. Now I'm going to fast forward because I don't want to keep you here till next Shabbat. Dad remarries and has 3 girls, myself the youngest. And yes, I believe the most spoiled. We lived in a very strict home. Now, strict to 99% of you, you have no idea what strict is. There was not much allowed. Outside of a wonderful private prep school education, everything else was church, and everything else was the Catholic religion. It was very powerful in my home, and my mother was in the church whenever the doors were open. Now, my oldest sister marries a nice Catholic Italian doctor. A mother's dream. The next sister falls in love with a very nice man who teaches in the same school, and my sister makes him convert to Catholicism so that they can get married. When I told my parents I wanted him to meet the man I loved and that he was Jewish, they told me he was not allowed in our house. We do not associate with Jews. Now comes the naughty part. I lied and saw him secretly. They screened my phone calls, and we had a relationship via phone booths. Now, again, for many of you, a phone booth is a tall thing like this. You open the door, you put some money in. Back then it was 10 cents. You close the door, and you talk. Now, I had to find phone booths that were nowhere near where my parents lived. And that's how we communicated most of the time. Now, my mother laid in bed screaming. And I love my mother to this day. I love my mother because she did not know what she needed to know. And she laid in bed and she cried and she screamed. And she hyperventilated until the doctor had to be called to sedate her. And it was all because I had fallen in love with someone who was Jewish. Now, I cried into my pillow many, many nights. And when I say I cried, the pillowcase was wet. And I cannot spend time telling you all the things that the Lord spoke to me as I cried into that pillow. But he firmly told me to hang in there. Hang in with the battle. Your mother really doesn't know what she's doing. Now, I could have run away, like most young people these days when they get into circumstances with their parents. I could have harmed myself in some way, but I didn't. The Lord was with me all the time. He was telling me to fight this battle, which I had no idea why I was fighting. Well, one day, as I was sitting with my mother, trying for the 100th time to show her how good this man was, that he was a teacher like myself at the time, that his parents were wonderful, and she became, once again, very agitated. And she looked at me, and she said, "Better that you're telling me that you killed somebody than to marry a Jew." Well, I tell you, this battle went on for 5 years. This battle to marry this man. And of course, we all know now why. Well, finally, there was a compromise. A big Italian wedding. Not one priest, not two priests, but 3 priests. In a big Italian church. And then to make everybody happy, we went to the country club to have the Jewish wedding. Now back then, again, hard for many of you to understand, we had to find a renegade rabbi. There weren't many who did this back then. So we had to pay for him to come down from New Hampshire to marry us. Well, fast forward again. My father has 2 children. We have 2 children. And Peter comes to know Yeshua. And you saw his testimony a few weeks ago. And we moved to Florida. Now, when we moved to Florida, the Lord blessed me with an opportunity to become involved for 18 years in full-time ministry. And the focus of that ministry was evangelism. And I learned a lot. And one great thing that he blessed me with was I was able to develop a newsletter for different situations that people might be battling and give them resources. And I'm saying that not because, oh, how great am I, but it is part of the journey, the story that I went through. And this newsletter, back then in the 90s, it may not seem like a big number right now, went to 500,000 people around the world. And the feedback was a blessing. As you know, the Lord has done miraculous things with the two of us. And I just wanted to emphasize the importance of going through whatever battle you're going through, whether it's marriage or financial or whatever. We went through a battle, but the Lord just brought us through and brought me through. I want you to continue to remember each and every day to talk to Yeshua. He is writing your story, whether it's glorious right now or whether it's not that glorious. He will bless others with your story, and we're going to be asking people to share their testimonies. If you feel led that you want to do that, please see Rabbi Adrian or Rabbi Barsky or myself or Rabbi Peter. Yeshua is watching over you, as those words were said, and he will save you. And I want to just close with one last thing. Your story is important. And you are going to enjoy the victory after the battle, because your story has an eternal happy ending.